Do we face a world energy crisis, or do we face an endless energy-rich future? The answer is yes, on both counts. The final answer will be determined by the direction of our commitment. It determines our action in the present, and with it, our future. The intentional use of energy to create a civilization has been a hallmark of humanity from the beginning. The use of fire defines us as being human. No other form of life on this planet has this capability. Over time, we have learned to use this capability well. However, we have also discovered that the more we use our capability to use energy, the more we deplete the resources for the production of the energy that we use. We have been big energy users for only a few hundred years. In a sense, we have barely begun on this path, and already a massive depletion of our resources has occurred. At the current rate of usage, our energy reserves will be gone in short order. They will be gone in 300 years for nuclear power, 250 years for natural gas, 112 years for coal, 64 years for oil, and 30 years for solar and wind power. While solar and wind power do not consume their resource limit is determined by how long the sun remains active. That's the point when the ice age begins. The point may be reached in 30 years. We face a high probability that the sun may go inactive in the near future, possibly 30 years from now. I have explored the details in my video presentation, Ice Age, of the dimming sun in 30 years. With this potential on the horizon, the depletion of our energy resources comes a critical factor in the present, especially as we need to prepare ourselves for the challenging times to come. Are we trapped then by the terminal factors of our energy resources? The answer depends on us, and it depends on what we regard as the human future. The human species have lived on the Earth for over 2 million years, but what we call civilization is relatively new. It developed during the last 6,000 years. The large-scale use of energy to advance our civilization hasn't really started until just a few hundred years ago, and already, we see the resources being depleted. The known reserves might last us for 2 or 3 more centuries, or maybe 5, if extreme conservation measures are applied. But no matter how we slice the pie, stretch the reserves, and utilize inefficient reserves, our energy future has a terminal quality, as energy is presently used. Our most optimistic estimates for available energy resources won't get us far into the next ice age, much less through the next 90,000 years of deep freeze conditions that cannot be avoided. And beyond that, we aim to survive and prosper through many more successive ice ages, until the epoch of the ice ages ends, and hope to have an infinite future lasting many millions of years into the future. If this is how we see our future, we need to have a new type of energy resource that is not subject to depletion. That's what the future dictates for the present. This is what we need to develop, or else we won't have that future all. And this is precisely what we can develop. The resource exists in space. If we move with the power of our humanity, our scientific and technological capability, we have the universe at our feet to develop the brightest future for us imaginable. This is the promise we can fulfill for ourselves, which we will fulfill as once we put our mind to the task to develop the great cosmic energy resource that powers the universe, which nothing can deplete by any means. All the evidence that stands before us today, that we see and explore, suggests that a ready-made interface exists between the Earth and the vast cosmic electric energy resource that surrounds us in space. The interface exists well within our reach, and exists as a type that is far greater in scope than our human needs for energy will ever require it to be. And in addition, the amazing promise stands before us even during the coming ice age environments. We are no longer strangers in space. We have developed great space capabilities and tools for research. What then would hinder us to develop the most critical resource on which our future existence depends? What is holding us back? The reason why we haven't developed the cosmic energy resource already is fairly simple. We are trapped into a conflict between 2 schools of perception, regardless of the evidence, of which the entropic school is dominant. The conflict is one of perception. The stage is divided between two contrary views of the nature of the universe. In one view it is actively powered and developing. In the other view it is self-consuming. With every sun burning by its own fuel towards its depletion and eventual death. The conflict is artificial. It keeps churning and keeps the field of science in the dark. For numerous reasons the resulting tragic state of darkness is maintained at great cost to us all. Ironically, the key factor in all that is a conflict of ideology about the nature of the universe that has large political and economic implications, especially on the energy front. Thus astrophysics maintained with two faces in conflict with each other. Two schools of perception rule the queen of the physical sciences today. One school of astrophysics regards the physical universe as a sea of electrically interconnected and electrically powered elements. On this platform the most perplexing phenomena become readily understandable and explorable in the laboratory. The other school of astrophysics regards the universe as ruled by gravity, with the electric force playing no role at all, as if it didn't exist. This is the entropic view of the universe, where everything is deemed to be decaying by energy depletion, and is winding down, like a wind-up toy is running down as its energy is spent, towards its inevitable zero-energy, death, when it stops. In the entropic school of astrophysics our sun, and every star in the universe is deemed to be a nuclear fusion furnace that consumes its own resources, whereby it collapses itself to its death. In its self-consuming state, while it shines for billions of years and burns its fuel, our sun is regarded as a constant factor that is applied to all the climate equations. While the observable evidence doesn't support the assumption, great epicycles have been invented to overcome the paradox of the evidence defying the theory without having to change the theory in compliance with the evidence. The existence of the ice ages, and of the Dansgaard-Oeschger oscillations within them, for example, is impossible to rationalize on grounds of mechanistic theories that assume the sun to be an invariable constant. Whatever rules the schools of entropic astrophysics stands on a platform of thinking that is purely imaginary and often irrational. For this reason, it is also inherently dangerous. It is dangerous because on this default train of thinking, where reality doesn't matter, in the light of fantasy, the real causative elements become completely omitted in the conclusions, as if they didn't exist. This scholarly commitment to something that is but a dream is what keeps humanity in the dark and latched to diminishing resources, as if they were humanity's only hope. All this means that the difference between the two schools of thinking, which appears to be purely philosophic in essence, is far from being trivial in the practical world. In real terms, the existing difference, which is a difference of opinions, is central to human living and to the very future of humanity. If humanity remains trapped inside the school of entropic thinking in astrophysics, so that it cannot see a sun for what it is, humanity will largely cease to exist in the very near future, because humanity will die when its entropic energy resources are consumed, and the development of the infinite resources that do exist and can be utilized, the cosmic anti-entropic energy resources, remains blocked, as it presently is. In the dead-end school where the cosmic electric energy resources are being denied to exist, a few irrational attempts are being made to develop renewable energy resources as a measure to conserve the dwindling conventional resources. While such attempts, wise as they seem, like building solar energy collectors, they are too feeble in energy density to meet the needs of a growing civilization. Windmills are slightly more efficient, and they actually do produce a greater share of the world's electric energy, but they likewise are far too feeble to meet the energy needs of a developing civilization. For operating wind farms, the strength of the wind is a key factor. This factor limits the placement to a few areas that are marginally useful, which are also prime food-producing areas. The best wind conditions are found offshore. Of course, offshore systems are several times more expensive to build and maintain. In spite of the cost, the offshore wind farms have become popular for a number of reasons. While the power production is relatively low in comparison with nuclear power generators, The greatest danger inherent in wind-powered systems is that they foster a dangerous illusion. Both the wind and solar power systems are built on the theory that the sun is a constant factor on the global energy scene at all times. In reality, the solar factor has been a fleeting phenomenon during the last few million years of the ice ages, when the sun becomes inactive for long periods. When the sun turns off, both the wind and solar-powered systems become useless junk. Whenever the cosmic electric input density falls below the minimal threshold level that is required for the electric sun system to function, then the active state of the sun can no longer be maintained. In such a case, the sun simply turns off. This off state has been the normal state of the sun throughout much of the Ice Age glaciation cycles. The dynamics behind the sun becoming inactive has been explored in a previous exploration video. The evidence is convincing that the next Ice Age transition will begin with the sun turning off, becoming dim yellow spot the size of the moon. In the face of an inactive sun, as the Ice Age begins, windmills and solar panels will simply be of no use. The danger is that by going the solar-powered path to develop new energy resources, the cosmic electric energy resources that have no inherent limits will fall by the wayside and remain undeveloped. By the universal nature of cosmic electric energy resources, these resources will continue to be available to us no matter what the next Ice Age may bring, and promise to be even stronger then. This is what we should develop, instead of playing with toys that become a death trap. No real imperative is forcing humanity to submit itself to the death of energy starvation that is assured on the current path, when our world is surrounded by vastly energy resources in the cosmic domain that humanity may ever care to use. In the school of electric cosmology, every galaxy and its hundreds of billions of stars within them, including our own solar system, are powered by vast electric energy streams. The evidence literally is in the stars, in their string-like formations, as was already noted. But being electric in nature, the cosmic energy streams are affected by resonance phenomena. The resonances vary by their interaction and overlap. At times they vary dramatically by the particular nature of their resonances. But even while they vary, they will never vanish completely or become consumed. These electric energy streams are the lifeblood of the universe, the blood that powers everything. The electric energy carriers in these streams are likely for this reason appropriately named plasma. The plasma streams in space all carry an electric charge. The plasma streams consist primarily of electrons and protons, the stuff that atoms are made of when they are energetically held together into atomic structures. The difference between atoms and the plasma that forms them is that the plasma particles are 100,000 times smaller themselves than the atoms they created. The plasma particles, therefore, as small and invisible as they are, furnish the entire mass of an atom, and by implication the entire mass of the tangible universe. Except the tangible universe, the part of the universe that we see, no matter how far we look, contains only a minuscule fraction of the mass that actually exists, which we cannot see, but can discern by its effects, by reading between the lines. Plasma scientists at the Los Alamos National Laboratory developed a revolutionary concept of the cosmos. The researchers recognized that 99.999% of the entire mass of the universe exists in the unbound, invisible, electrically charged form of matter that is called plasma. This means that our telescopes can only recognize 0.001% of the mass that actually exists. The rest is in too small a form to be visible. However, this invisible portion, that looks like empty space between the distant galaxies, contains up to 99.999% of the mass of the universe. It is this huge invisible part of the cosmos that carries the electric charge, that is the lifeblood of every galaxy, small or large, near or far, and lights up every star in the universe. Obviously, the plasma streams reach far beyond the limits of what our finest telescopes can see of the cosmos, like the limits of this view across 500 million light-years of space. This means that there exists plenty electric energy in space. A minute portion of the cosmic energy streams also flows into and through our solar system, fed by the great intergalactic cosmic resources streams. If the plasma streams that flow through our solar system were dense enough to be visible, we would likely see them in shapes similar to that of the planetary nebula shown here. While our sun is just a mediocre star, it evidently attracts enough plasma to light it up brilliantly, with more than enough plasma flowing through the solar system unused for meeting our needs to if we care to tap into this readily available cosmic energy resource that surrounds us. It is a ready-made energy resource that is available to us as our resource for a boundless energy future. Without the utilization of the boundless cosmic energy resources, humanity has no future. We have tragically limited ourselves, in our small-minded ways, to the use of consumable resources that diminish by our consumption. However, we don't have to go this route when other options are available. We have no need to tie ourselves to diminishing resources that we deplete. We can have a boundless future if we step out of the strap, a kind of earthbound grave. We have the option to begin today to utilize the cosmic resources that, unlike oil, nothing in our world can deplete. The Ice Age video series that this production is a part of is designed to demonstrate that the boundless cosmic electric energy resources do exist, and that we can have an inherently bright and rich future with the use of these resources that we have within our reach right now, and have the capability to develop, even at this late hour, provided we care enough to reinvigorate our diminishing humanist energy. If we fail to meet the Humanist challenge, the Ice Age challenge then cannot be met either. In this case, the human presence will diminish from the current 7 billion people to maybe just a few million. This means that our meeting the Ice Age challenge depends entirely on us meeting the Humanist challenge. The Ice Age challenge is not basically a physical challenge because we have the physical and technological resources to make the coming Ice Age non-event. But will we do it? This unanswered question renders the Ice Age challenge primarily a human commitment challenge. If we fail to meet the Ice Age challenge, we do so purely on the grounds of having lost our qualification to live as human beings. I like to believe that we will not fail in the humanist arena. We will get ourselves off the ground in this arena, and we will fly. We are, after all, the highest form of life on this planet with great capabilities in creative and productive endeavors. We are the supreme being on this planet. We are in essence the hand of God, the hand of love and truth, the executors of the will of God that cannot be blocked in principle. We are the discoverers, creators, and producers in this world, with a scientific genius that opens the door to the energies of the universe. We are not born to die on the default train, but we will die there if we don't get off. So, let us explore almost from the beginning, as it were, in this series of videos related to the dimming sun Ice Age, why we are not tied to the ground, but truly have an open door to infinity before us, and with it the greatest incentive to step away from the dead end of energy entropy that would keep us tied to the ground, where we would die in the near future without a resource left for our living. This particular video, which is focused on our energy future, has been produced as the first sequel to the video, Ice Age, of the dimming sun, in 30 years. The sequel is needed now in the present, to lift us out of our small-minded thinking, because we face a huge crisis on the energy front if we don't snap out of our self-denial in the short term. We face this energy crisis already, even without the Ice Age coming up, and its consequences. The coming Ice Age only adds a somewhat more ominous dimension to the challenge. We have a severe energy crisis looming on the horizon no matter how we look at it. We are running out of resources on every front on the spectrum of energy production. We face a severe crisis when the dwindling oil reserves run out. The world's oil reserves are presently estimated at about 1.3 trillion barrels. This gigantic seeming resource, however, adds up to only 64 years of supply at the present rate of production. When the resource is used up, then what will power our economy for the remaining 90,000 years of the coming next Ice Age will be upon us without fail. In the long sweep of universal history, humanity's presence on this planet has been brief, comparable to a blink of an eye. In this blink of an eye, the development of what we call civilization occurred within a blink of a blink, spanning the last 6,000 years. We learned to use energy in a big way in this time frame, primarily in the last few centuries. Now we have come to the point where the depletion of the energy resources that we have learned to use, that civilization depends on, will be upon us in 50 to 200 years. Where do we go to secure our energy future? We face the task to bring a highly developed civilization all the way through the next 90,000 years glaciation cycle, and of course way beyond that too. The power for this absolutely critical feat to be possible can only be derived from anti-entropic energy resources that do not diminish with use, which thereby can never be depleted. Not a single energy resource that we have been using on Earth qualifies for that. Sure, the world has large recoverable oil reserves of a different type that it can draw on, like oil from oil shale and oil sands. These are large resources sitting on the ground that have been estimated to yield around 3 to 4 trillion barrels of oil. While those resources are somewhat more difficult to recover, whereby the depletion takes a bit longer, they will nevertheless give us only an additional 200 years of supply. This means that no matter how we look at it, our greatest resources are nevertheless insignificant in comparison with the 90,000 years of the next ice age that we need increased energy resources for, which may be upon us in possibly 30 years' time. A 200-year supply, even a 1,000-year supply, such as nuclear power might offer, compares as nothing in the long time frame of the coming ice age that will last for 90,000 years, which will impose additional energy requirements. Since we expect our civilization to survive on this planet far beyond just a single ice age, or even a few of them, and expect to prosper for millions upon millions of years yet to come, we need to recognize that our future history stands in the balance presently, in the shadow of the unfolding energy crisis that has been left unaddressed, as if closing one's eyelids would cause the challenge to go away. Do we have no hope then? Is humanity going to fizz out into nothing by the death of our energy resource depletion? Oh yes, we would fizz out into nothing if we continued on the present course of doing nothing to develop the necessary higher-level energy resources that cannot be depleted. Sure, energy applications from oil and gas can be replaced with electric energy development. Indeed, enormous amounts of electric energy are already being produced around the world. However, while large amounts of electric energy are being produced, the bulk of our electric energy is derived from oil, gas, and coal, with a small portion coming from nuclear energy. Since these resources are all of a type that is being depleted by the utilization of it, the electric energy production that we may hail as the savior of our future, especially nuclear power, is nevertheless tied to the same depletion process that places a finite limit on its availability. Of all the resource sectors that are presently utilized for electric energy production, the nuclear power sector has by far the largest resource base available. But even nuclear power is ultimately a resource that is limited by depletion. Uranium for nuclear power is in relatively short supply, of which only 0.5% is actually fissionable for power production. While breeder reactors can activate the unusable uranium, the process is messy, highly radioactive, and is likewise limited by the depletion of the resource for it. Activated thorium is ultimately the world's most abundant nuclear fuel available, of which up to 90% can be made fissionable. The presently known recoverable resource base is sufficient for the production of 2 million gigawatt-years of energy, conservatively. The utilization of this resource would offer us almost 1,000 years of nuclear-powered electricity at the current rate of worldwide electricity production. The bottom line, however, remains the same. Even this most gigantic resource for nuclear power production stacks up as nothing against the background of the long sweep of the ice ages and the distant future that we expect humanity to have, spanning billions of years to come. We simply cannot exist for longer than just a blink of eye in this vast expanse of time on a platform of energy resources that are depleted by their use, whether they last 200 years or 1,000 years. On the front of nuclear fusion power, not a single success has been achieved. The main blocking factor is that it takes a large kinetic force of energy to overcome the electric repulsion of the nuclei that must fuse for power extraction to become possible. The extremely strong electric repulsion between the fuel nuclei prevents their atoms from merging. While it is possible to force the fuel atoms to merge, with massive external energy being applied, the output energy that is achieved from the forced fusion is too feeble to cover the input energy needs for the fusion to happen, much less to produce a net energy gain. Enormous efforts have been made in recent times to develop a workable process to actually produce usable nuclear fusion energy. A gigantic experimental device is presently built in Europe, the ITER, that will stand a quarter as high as the Great Pyramid in Egypt to explore ways to overcome the inhibiting problems. It is deemed that if the process could be made successful, it would create a new energy resource of near infinite abundance. The evidence on this front, however, tells us that this great effort, that has been ongoing for decades already, is a dead-end pursuit. No naturally occurring nuclear fusion energy production is happening anywhere in the universe. The principle for such an energy production process doesn't exist, nor is it needed, as the universe is flush with electric energy streams. Natural barriers against nuclear fusion exist instead that protect the universe from destroying itself. Nuclear fusion is an energy-consuming process in the natural world, by which atoms are formed. Nuclear fusion is not an energy-creating process. The vast flash of energy that is released by a thermonuclear bomb is not the product of nuclear fusion. It is the product of latent energy being released when two overbuilt isotopes, deuterium and tritium, are violently forced to fuse in such a manner that a neutron, which has been previously bound to their nuclei, becomes unbound, because it has no longer a place in the resulting fused product. The energy that is released in this process is essentially the product of nuclear fission, which too merely releases previously invested, talented energy. Nuclear fusion energy production doesn't work for three reasons. The energy level of the neutron that is released, which is the usable energy, is 100 times greater than in normal nuclear reactors. The strong neutron flux destroys the fabric of the metals that the reactors are made of. It also makes the reactors intensely radioactive. This hugely damaging effect is great for nuclear bombs that are designed to kill people, but it makes the process inherently useless for power reactors. Also, the required fusion fuel isotopes, deuterium and tritium, are hard to produce. Deuterium exists in seawater in a highly diluted ratio so that it takes the processing of 600,000 tons of seawater to extract enough deuterium for 1 ton of fusion fuel that would, if the process was workable, power a 1 gigawatt reactor for a year. In order to replicate the current electricity production by this process, 2,500 times as much water would have to be processed for the needed fuel each year. This would be a gigantic requirement, if not a prohibitive one. For tritium, the fuel situation is worse. Tritium doesn't exist naturally at all. It needs to be bred from lithium-6 in nuclear fission reactors, in an extremely slow process. Also, the numbers don't add up for this process to make sense. It takes 1 tritium atom to produce 1 neutron in a fusion reactor, while it takes 1 neutron, irradiating lithium-6, to produce 1 tritium atom for the new fuel. This means that no net energy gain is actually produced in this process. Also, lithium-6 is quite rare. A mere 7.5% of natural lithium is lithium-6. Attempts are made to breed the needed tritium directly in the fusion reactor itself from lithium-7, but if one considers the shielding required for the project to be workable, a reasonable success is near impossible. Nor will it ever be possible to capture all the fusion-released neutrons for self-sustained breeding to be realized. In addition, it takes more energy input to create the brute force to cause the fusion to happen than the fusion process gives back. No net energy gain has yet been achieved. While fusion burns have been achieved in some of the largest reactors, the fusion process itself has an inherent flaw, which all by itself makes fusion power impractical. The flaw is that the fusion process blows itself out for reasons that the fusion fuel is being diluted with the resulting fusion product. The longest burn time to date that has been achieved was about 1 second. A different approach to nuclear fusion power utilizes light to compress a tiny sphere of fusion fuel, image 1, with such immense power that its atoms begin to fuse. The fuel is placed inside a small hollow capsule made of gold, image 2. It is irradiated with 192 beams of light inside the hollow capsule, image 3. The irradiation occurs inside a 30-foot target chamber, image 5, where the capsule is precisely positioned relative to the light beams, image 4. 500 trillion watts of light is applied to the target from 48 directions, in a gigantic facility, larger than a sports stadium, named the National Ignition Facility, image 6. The facility contains 192 large lasers that are designed to compress the fuel sphere at a velocity of 370 kilometers per second. When fusion will be accomplished, which has not been achieved to date, the fusion power produced will be roughly 1/10 of the power input required to cause the fusion to happen. Should ignition be achieved in the future, the fusion burn will be extremely short in duration, in the range of nanoseconds, with a 20-hour cooling-off period required between shots. Actual commercial power production simply cannot be achieved on this basis. Nuclear fusion power is a concept that started with a dream and will remain a dream. The entire concept will remain a dream forever, because even if all the technical barriers against the power production process could be overcome by some magic, the key element in the process, which is its fuel cycle, makes the concept ultimately an impossible dream. The entire nuclear fusion power development project is built on the neutron-heavy deuterium-tritium fuel. This neutron-heavy fuel is the only fuel that can be made to fuse with a reasonable amount of energy input. Since the tritium isotope is double neutron heavy, it doesn't exist naturally. It can be artificially created in a fission reactor that produces free neutrons that can be applied to fission lithium into helium and tritium. It is here where the fuel cycle breaks down. A fusion reactor cannot breed its own fuel. It can breed some of it by the fissioning of lithium-6, but not enough, because the fission process to produce the tritium requires as many neutrons for its input than the tritium in the fusion process generates. Because of neutron capture inefficiencies, uranium fission reactors will always be required for the supplemental breeding of the fusion fuel. Uranium-235 is the only natural element in existence on Earth that emits free neutrons. Every nuclear power reactor on Earth utilizes the atomic fission characteristic of uranium that releases free neutrons. No other efficient natural source for free neutrons exists other than U-233, U-235, and U-239 as are presently used in nuclear power production, which has a highly limited fuel resource. A large nuclear power station with a net electrical capacity of 1,300 MW requires about 210,000 kg of raw uranium per year as input for the fuel production. At the current rate of uranium consumption, the reserves in presently operating mines will be exhausted in 20 years. Presently unused economic reserves can extend their uranium supply for another 80 years. It is assumed that as yet undiscovered resources may exist that could extend the supply for another 300 years, and it is further assumed that presently uneconomic ores might extend the supply for possibly as long as 1,500 years. In theory, the uranium supply can never be depleted. The rocks of the Earth, even seawater, contain trace amounts of uranium. But for all practical purposes, such as for large-scale power production, uranium is a finite resource that will likely be depleted for practical applications in 100 years. While it is possible to fission lithium-7 to produce tritium, shown as case 2, high-energy neutrons are required for the fission to be possible. While a fusion reactor does produce high-energy neutrons that would fission lithium-7, in practice the two cannot meet. The shielding that is required of the lithium against the high thermal flux of fusion reactions exceeding 100 million degrees requires shielding materials that block the fast neutrons that the lithium-7 fission requires. Those materials do not exist at the present. It might be possible to produce them in the future, though little hope exists. And on top of all that, the critical lithium is in short supply. That is required in either case to produce the fusion fuel. If nuclear fusion power should miraculously become a practical possibility, its future would be limited by lithium being inherently a finite resource that is also required for numerous other applications. At the current production rates to meet the supply for numerous applications, the known worldwide resource of lithium will likely be depleted in roughly 400 years. In order to remove the needed lithium from seawater, for 1 ton of fusion fuel, that would produce 1 gigawatt-year of energy. Under the most ideal circumstances, the processing of more than 10 million tons of seawater would be required. On the practical scale, this reads impossible. The bottom line is that nuclear fusion energy production will remain an unrealizable dream for far too many reasons. On almost all fronts, fundamental barriers stand in its way. So, why would we pursue this dream at all then, especially if we don't need nuclear fusion power anyway? We don't need it, even if it could be made workable, because the available cosmic electric energy that evidently exists and is within our reach exists on a scale in comparison that far supersedes all of our present and future energy needs. The answer is no. Biofuels, as an energy resource, stand before us in principle as another unrealizable dream. The dream is essentially a lie. Biofuels are typically not a net energy producer. The physical process of distilling food into a motor fuels, with all the input energy accounted for that goes into the process, generates no appreciable energy gain, or extremely little, typically when manual slave-type labor is involved. Biofuels are efficient only in producing genocide. The biofuels process is in practice an expensive and wastefully energy conversion process that doesn't even reduce pollution, but doubles CO2 emissions and adds some substantially dangerous pollution of its own, such as ozone, and a number of carcinogens that are produced in ethanol combustion. The pollution is killing people in quiet and visible ways, especially in the cities, where the pollution is concentrated. Of course, the burning of food is also killing people with hunger and starvation. Biofuels are highly effective as a tool for inflicting genocide by the mass burning of food. The amount of food that is presently burnt would normally nourish 220 million people. Some estimates go as high as 400 million people. By burning vast quantities of food in a world that has 1 billion people living in chronic starvation, we are committing at least 100 million people to death by slow starvation. We are not creating energy with a biofuels platform. Instead, we are destroying the most valuable form of energy we have, which is the humanist energy that powers our industries, farming, science, and civilization as a whole. If we let go of this most precious energy, we lose ourselves, we imprison ourselves and our future with it, and we impose on us the death sentence of silent starvation. The crisis is knowable. The facts are tragically plain. I have produced a video on the subject that explores the details more fully. Its title is Mass Murder Biofuels, a Presidential Election Issue. That the biofuels project is not an energy project, but is a politically motivated genocide project, is evident by the relentless refusal of the leaders of empire to lift the biofuels mandate, in the face of increasing drought conditions, severe food shortages, and collapse in the farming and the food supply industries. Massive protests and petitions have been launched by numerous organizations, all aiming to halt the burning of food to protect human nutrition. The petitions have all been rebuffed. Nor has the depopulation policy been lifted, which is designed to reduce the human presence on the Earth from the current 7 billion to a mere 1 billion people. We are allowing an energy crisis to be created by default, by our stupidity, by our refusal to acknowledge the real world. This tragedy is knowable. While we are facing the undeniable dead end of resource depletion on every one of the default energy fronts, where we just into the earth and use what we find, we staunchly refuse to look at the greatest resource we can possibly have that is greater than anything we dream about. It is only by the foolish refusal to look at the real world that we have locked ourselves into a dead-end game where our energy resources are coming to an end no matter how we slice the pies up. With this dead end being committed to behind the near universal denial of the power of our humanity, the end of the human future literally does stand before us because we refuse to step up to higher ground. Nevertheless, the development of our power to access the cosmic electric energy streams remains standing before us. It is our future. We remain doomed only by our smallness and thinking, and only for as long as we cling to it. The cosmic solution that we seek and need is knowable too. The solution stares us in the face. Our scientific sense as human beings enables us to see what lies outside the scope of the default visual senses. With the eye of the mind we can see vast streams of energy surrounding us, even in the small, here on Earth. We see evidence of it every time a lightning bolt strikes, and a tornado revs up, and a hurricane develops. These are all phenomena powered on Earth by cosmic electricity that we can give ourselves access to. It has been long believed that lightning and tornadoes are the result of thermoconvection. But the closer one looks, the more it becomes apparent that these amazingly powerful phenomena, like the hurricanes, result from much more powerful forces of a magnitude that is typical of the electric force to achieve. Thermal convection provides the interface for the current flow from the ionosphere into the clouds, but the power that unfolds in the giant storms is of a greater magnitude than simply warm air rising. Hurricanes are essentially twisters on a larger scale, which require larger resources to get going. The hurricanes appear in two bands, north and south of the equator, in the tropical zones. The hurricane bands are most active in areas where the electrojets in the ionosphere are located overhead. Since the electrojets are tilted with the tilt of the Earth's magnetic pole, the electrojet that crosses South America is tilted too far south to be in range for the tropical air currents to start hurricanes. Apparently, as a consequence, the seas near South America are free of hurricanes. Once the hurricanes are hooked into the ionospheric currents of the electrojets, a connection is established that moves with the hurricanes for long distances. The strongest storms occur where the node points are the strongest, and appear not at all where the electric currents are out of range, as on both sides of South America. The lack of hurricanes there adds one more proof to the hypothesis that hurricanes are electrically powered. The sad fact is that we have not even begun the kind of serious energy production on Earth that we are capable of. We have played with toys so far. We have worked our way up the energy resource ladder. We started with burning wood. When this became too small for our needs in terms of energy density, we began to burn coal, then oil and gas, and soon thereafter we learned to use nuclear fuels. We've advanced up many steps on this ladder. But there remains one last step to take. This is a giant step that promises to change the entire energy spectrum on Earth. The step involves the utilization of cosmic energy resources. Those have no resource depletion limits. They are anti-entropic in nature. Let's make a comparison. Let's look at the total electric energy production on the Earth and consider it in cosmic terms. The total world production flux is 2,500 gigawatts. This adds up to a mere 5/1000 of a watt per square meter of the Earth. Now let us compare this minuscule amount of the man-made electric energy with the energy of the solar energy that the Earth is receiving, which adds up to 773 watts per square meter. This means that the cosmic energy flux that is radiated from the Sun is 150,000 times larger than our current world production of electric energy. This also means that the cosmic electric energy that powers the Sun itself is many times greater again. It is this larger cosmic energy flux that is to a lesser degree accessible by humanity on Earth. It is the resource for our future, if we care to have a future. We gain a glimpse, by the comparison presented here, of the gigantic cosmic energy resources that lay at our feet, which are presently not utilized and not even being seriously considered to become utilized as an energy resource. We close our eyes instead to this available energy resource. We close our eyes to it while our future depends on this very resource that we don't want to see. We have no need, even today, while the Sun still shines brightly, to depend on radiated thermal energy that is coming from the Sun, which ends to a large degree when the Sun becomes inactive. The sunlight we receive today is a secondary effect of the cosmic electric energy being utilized by the Sun, which we have the intelligent capability to hook ourselves into directly instead of standing at the back door as beggars. This recognition gives us the freedom to step beyond windmill projects and solar panels, which render us as impotent beggars at the back door, which is itself subject to closure. We have the scientific resources, as human beings, that enable us to utilize the cosmic energy resources directly, which are available to us in the space around the Earth, which are the same resources that are powering the Sun itself, and also some rather impressive phenomena on Earth. The power that powers the hurricanes doesn't flow from the Sun to us as thermal energy. Hurricanes and tornadoes are electrically powered. They are a tiny part of the evidence that our world, together with the Sun, is afloat in a vast sea of cosmic electric energy, a resource that can never be exhausted. While we are running out of many types of energy on this planet as we consume their resources, we need to recognize that not all of the energies that we require to exist as a society are found in the physical domain. Civilization is primarily a construct of humanist energy that reflects the power of a substance that is spiritual. This means that we cannot be running out of energy in the sphere of our humanity, reflected culturally, economically, and financially. Our humanity is not consumable. It cannot be used up. But it needs to be nurtured, especially in the dark places. Where there is no beauty, it can be again. Where there is no love, it can triumph again. If a loss in civilization and culture occurs, it doesn't mean that what was once precious has been used up. It only means that we have closed our eyes to our own light. If the loss of our humanist energy occurs in the financial landscape of civilization, the consequences of keeping our eyes closed come to light with ominous forebodings and shadows fast falling around, covering the landscape with a consuming darkness. The loss of attention to society's humanist energy was powerfully illustrated by the 2013 financial bail-in process on the island of Cyprus, with which the economy of Cyprus was recently devastated, as if an atomic bomb had hit. The bail-in process is a form of legal confiscation of a large portion of society's assets that people assume they own in the form of bank deposits. It was that way once when honor and humanity were held high, but it is no more. It is now an illusion. Every bank deposit is play money now that rides the roulette wheels on financial derivatives casino. The winnings are kept by the banks. If the banks lose, Your money is gone with the wind. It is a kind of bank heist by the banks. Your assets simply get bailed in to pay for the bank's losses. What you thought you had exists no more, unless you bought insurance for your bank deposits and the insurance sound. That's how the game is played. In Cyprus, the grand theft was implemented against people's accounts exceeding the insured limit of €100,000. The rest was deemed fair game and was largely confiscated on orders of the rulers of the European Union to save the gambling banks owned by the rulers of the game. The bail-in scheme, to pay the gambling debts of the bankers on orders from on high, now stands before society as the universal template for the future. It marks a turning point towards the end of civilization and of the productive and creative development of humanity. It also marks the self-surrender of society's humanity. It marks the end of human values, of society standing up for itself by protecting one another. The great bank heist by the banks, applied in Cyprus, was launched officially from the highest ranks in Europe, from the European Commission, the European Central Bank, and the IMF, all ganging up against the people. The wonderfully profitable game for the masters of it was designed from the start to serve as a template to be applied to the rest of Europe, the USA, and the entire West. Since the bail-in laws have already been passed in the legislatures of most of the nations in the West, the template of the great legal bank heist in Cyprus by the banks themselves is now enshrined in law throughout the entire Western world. So be prepared. It's coming soon to the banks near you. The grand theft that is now legal is designed as a method for paying off the bank's derivatives gambling losses. The bail-in of the depositors' assets is deemed necessary as a means to keep systemically important financial institutions, which means all the big gambling banks, from going bankrupt from their gambling losses, whereby the gambling casino itself is protected so that the gamblers never lose. This is what society is agreeing within the shadow of its waning interest in its self-protection and self-development. That's what gambling fundamentally is, isn't it? The now legalized wide-open thievery may seem so insane that many say it will never happen. The reality is that it has already happened in Cyprus. But even years before it happened in Cyprus, the laws had already been out in place for the grand thievery to be implemented throughout the Western world at a moment's notice. One member of the United States Congress protested, saying that this wild scheme will never pass in the House of Congress. He had to be reminded that it has already passed, and that he himself voted it up in passing the Dodd-Frank bill. Unless the grand theft laws are rescinded, the grand theft bail-in heist may soon be featured at the banks near you. This is how deeply our society lost its humanity, its humanist energy, its power to protect and advance itself. The bail-in process is an extension of the bailout process. With the bailout process, up to $50 trillion have already been stolen from society by way of the government printing more money. The increased issuing of currency hyperinflates the currency. This means that the greater the volume is with which currency is issued, the less the currency is functionally worth. Society's assets are radically shrunk by this thievery. It is a hidden kind of theft that is applied with the bailout process. However, since the bailout process is slow and cumbersome, the bail-in process has been added to steal another $11 trillion from society in a more streamlined fashion. In its cultivated, small-minded, self-centered focus, society utters not as much a whimper, much less the kind of powerful protest that a human society is capable of. The cultivated smallness in society appears to be intentional. It is self-evident that even the greatest grand thievery will not solve any of the underlying ailments of the world economies, or even the ailments of the banks. The evidence stands glaringly before us in the ratio of society's assets in the banks in comparison with the size of the financial derivatives casino scams that the banks are running, to which the depositors' assets are applied to cover the losses. The ratio is enormous. With just a few $1 trillion in assets, the banks operate a casino that carries gambling contracts in the range of 1,500 to 1,700 trillions of dollars in notional values. Since the banks control the game, they rarely ever lose. They rake in fantastic fees from the gambling orgies. These the banks consume as profits and pay out to the thieves. However, if the banks lose, and this applies to nearly all financial institutions in the modern world, it only takes a few cases from the enormous bulk of risky gambles for the banks to gamble away all the assets that they have, which are typically their depositors' assets. In order to save the banks from going under, the taxpayers were coerced to step up to the plate and bail the banks out as an emergency measure to keep the system afloat. In the modern age of the bail-in game has been added, with which the thievery from society has been streamlined. The process has become so highly automated that the death of civilization can be inflicted in the space of a single day. Naturally, the bail-in automation can't solve the underlying problem because it is simply impossible for all the money in the world to pay off the gambling losses in the horrifically giant financial derivatives casino that has become a monster that dwarfs everything. Yes, the monster will kill you. The killing spree serves the depopulation game. The depopulation target is to shrink the human society on this planet from the present 7 billion to about 1 billion, all nicely mired in poverty, as in the golden age of feudalism. The wholesale confiscation of society's bank deposits with the bail-in game will invariably kill people in large numbers. When the financial interchange that enables economic actions stops, then everything stops. The fuel supply stops. Transportation stops. The food supply stops. And without food, people don't live long. The bail-in process is by design a process of genocide. That's what the evidence indicates. The deadly color of the bail-in game may not appear on the surface. It remains carefully hidden until the day it is unleashed. In the case of an iceberg, less than 10% of its volume is visible on the surface. In the case of the derivatives gambling orgy, almost nothing is visible on the surface. Like the infamous Titanic was sunk by colliding it with the invisible ice below the surface, so society is set up to be sunk by its impending collision with the derivatives gambling orgy that becomes dramatically visible only when the ship sinks. While the sinking of civilization, and mankind with it, has been prepared to happen, with or without the ice age ahead, there exists no need for society to follow the prepared course. Our human energy, which is not a naturally depletable resource, has been blocked artificially. It has been taken down by political means. It lays useless on the ground. It has become so lifeless that the entire Western world bows to the kings of empire and the glitter of its money that has no value in the spiritual heavens, for the fulfillment of the common aims of mankind, which is built on productivity, creativity, cooperation, goodwill, care, science, and love. Every homeless person, unemployed, and desperately in want, stands before us as an indictment of our humanity, and an indictment of us for having allowed the most precious we have to diminish. Society has been dragged into a war against itself. For example, in the service of real estate speculation, rent gouging, and so on, the pricing of homes has taken on such catastrophic proportions that the resulting depressed living conditions in the society at large depress the value of the greatest asset a society has, which is itself. This insanity opens the floodgates to ever greater forms of hell. Everything that has been produced on this earth has been created by human beings in intelligent, productive processes. If we trash the human landscape with poverty, manifest in slum living, unemployment, and harassment instead of care, and so on, we deplete the spiritual strength of the human being by the tragic process of neglect, by neglecting the intelligence that powers agriculture, industries, scientific discoveries, creative cultures, music, literature, healthcare, education, and so on. To whatever degree we allow poverty to develop in society, we foster a society that is destroying itself and is on the path of becoming a terminal society. When the precious is lost, little but a shell remains. Poverty, thus, isn't a characteristic of the poor people and the downtrodden. Poverty is a symptom of a dying society, a society that is dying at the heart. It is a measure of the lack of quality in human relationships, and the lack of power in society to assure its survival. The polarization of wealth is a typical syndrome on the face of a dying civilization. The polarization of wealth is the product of the ever-widening circles of thievery. That is the hallmark of the oligarchic system of private imperial monetarism that is collapsing civilization. The bailing process and its tragedy is not an isolated phenomenon then, or a new invention of our times as were. It is instead merely another further aggravated symptom of the same disease in society that has been left to fester for far too long instead of it being healed. Naturally, the tragedies that flow from this relentless process of empire become increasingly worse. There was a time in the past when a protection had been developed against the thievery and rampages of empire, which had culminated in 1648 in the Treaty of Westphalia that ended the scourge of the 30 Years' War. This protection has been removed in many places. It is said that we are now in the post-Westphalian era. In the USA, in 1933, the Glass-Steagall Act had effectively curbed the wanton speculation in the banking world. It had protected the nation's currency and economic development for 60 years. It had protected society quite effectively against the worst forms of the speculative thievery. Then, in 1999, in order to get this protection against thievery removed, the financial oligarchy had put up a $350 million slush fund to bribe the lawmakers and parties to repeal the Glass-Steagall Financial Protection Act. With this massive kind of bribery corrupting the small group of lawmakers that number just over 500 people and the political parties that control them, the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act promptly happened as ordered, and with it the protection of society was repealed. Society hasn't mustered the humanist strength to date to get its self-protection reinstated, which, if it was voted up again, would block the bailing process that promises to have nuclear war-type consequences for society. The impotence in society to protect itself is not natural. It has been carefully cultivated over many years. The nuclear consequences that will ensue in due course are evidently intended under the long-promoted depopulation program that aims to eliminate much of the world population from the 7 billion people living today to about 1 billion. This plan is well underway. It will succeed unless society rebuilds its humanist energy and claims its humanity back. This is a type of the deadly face of the poverty in modern society in terms of its lost humanist power. It is the face of a willful regression that renders society increasingly unqualified for survival. The disease in society that fosters its giving up its humanist power is deadly. It is chronic and terminal. The threat of nuclear war is merely a facet of this disease become acute, which now threatens to extinct humanity altogether. Fortunately, the humanist energy is not built on a finite resource that can be depleted, like the resources for oil, gas, and nuclear power are being depleted. Humanist energy is built on an anti-entropic resource that becomes more abundant the more it is developed. The most advanced science of Christianity, Christian Science, defines the human energy resource as our divine resource, expressed in such profound spiritual qualities as intelligence, love, truthfulness, honesty, creativity, productivity, honor, generosity, joy, and so on. Take love, for example. We cannot see it, weigh it, measure it, but we have learned from experience that when it is withdrawn from the human landscape, civilization disintegrates. Wars are created that way, and are started for this purpose. Inversely, when the divine spiritual qualities that are reflected in our humanity are developed and used as a foundation to build on, a great renaissance unfolds in civilization. Every renaissance in history was built on this platform and became a showcase for the spiritual power of humanity and the rich potentials of its culture. On this front, the divine, spiritual nature of humanity is our infinite resource for empowering the grandest renaissance of all times. It has been our resource for ages past, and will be that again for times and times to come. The small-minded sense and supposed beastliness of mankind is a lie. Famines and fascism and all of the empire wars against humanity are lies against humanity, lies rooted in society's degraded self-perception that became a people's self-denial of its native humanist energy and power. We have seen a number of great achievements in history in which humanity began to heal itself of the disease of oligarchy, empire, wealth, poverty, monetarism, and fascism, and its quiescence to them. Since the human energy in society for its self-revival is not naturally depletable, the apparent loss of it during the ancient and modern Dark Ages is a purely artificial effect that can be reversed. And why shouldn't a similar reversal process start now, and start on the entire front? The process of humanist reinflation always begins in the present. The development of our humanist energy resource is an absolutely necessary precondition for the development of the astrophysical electric energy resources that we require for the survival of civilization. The technologies that enable us to access the interface to the cosmic energy streams up to 100 kilometers above the surface of the Earth are not beyond our reach. Just as hurricanes and tornadoes are routinely powered by the grand cosmic resources, the economies of humanity can be powered so likewise. Of course, the required infrastructures need to be developed and built. But those two are not beyond our reach, either once we develop our spiritual humanist power more fully that enables us to step up to the task. In this context, the world's future energy development is a function of society's humanist development. The two happen together as an integrated process, or they don't happen at all. If we do not begin this process soon and develop our humanist power on all fronts, in order to be able to fly at ever higher levels on the wide front of our humanity, we won't have the humanist power created within us to develop the boundless cosmic electric energy resources that are within reach, but which we need as an infrastructure to be able to fly through the long night of the Ice Age cycles under an inactive sun. Of course, we can also choose to do nothing and remain glued to the East chair, as all the previous human society apparently have done who have failed to protect their existence and stopped moving forward. We, the Homo sapiens number 8, the only surviving and the shortest lived of all the human species, at barely 200,000 years of age, are roughly the 8th major human species. The previous 7 have all become extinct, possibly as the result of the many ice ages. Homo erectus number 4 had existed for 1.5 million years, but it too became extinct. But now, for the first time in geologic history, we, as the first species ever, have developed the capacity to steal the sting off the Ice Age and bypass the tragedy that other species may have suffered as the result of it. Our challenge, this time around, is to make it through the next Ice Age with a 7 to 10 billion population and come out richer at the end. We can do this with the power of developed cosmic resources on hand and not miss a beat as we move forward. Shouldn't we act then, to protect the little we have still left of our humanity and enrich it as never before, and build on it with our eyes focused on the infinite future that is due to us as the most advanced species of life on the Earth?